In this episode, we talk about the practice of taking hostages in unconventional warfare. We also talk about the Goan cashews getting the GI tag and how it would affect local traders. But first, we talk about how state governments have been trying to woo farmers in the run-up to the assembly elections. Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargava, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. The agricultural sector accounts for over 45% of the total workforce in the country. And this is why political parties in Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, and Telangana have been vying for their support with the state elections less than a month away.
See, farmers are always an important vote bank.
That's Indian Express's rural affairs editor, Harish Damodaran.
Though I think the more recent trend has been for the government to, look at consumers as a bigger vote bank than producers, because the number of consumers are always higher than the number of farmers, And that is probably one reason why you see more and more of the government's policy being more pro-consumer than pro-farmer. But my feeling is that this calculation may not apply to the 4 states which are going into elections, which is basically your Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Telangana. Because these 4 are agriculturally very dense states. And because the proportion of the workforce which is engaged in farming is much higher.
For example, in Chhattisgarh, the agricultural workforce is 62%. And in Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan, it is between 55 to 60%.
And that's huge, So to that extent, I think that the farm votes will matter much more in these elections than in elections, say, in Bihar or even in UP.
And to understand how the current state governments have been trying to woo farmers and the issues they have been facing, we speak to Harish in this segment. Harish, let's begin by talking about Chhattisgarh. You mentioned that over 60% of its workforce is in agriculture. And this time, Bhupesh Baghel's Congress government has promised to hike the paddy purchase price to 3,600 rupees per quintal over the next term. Talk about how that came about and how important is that to the farmers there?
Yes, in Chhattisgarh, paddy is a very important crop. And Chhattisgarh is synonymous actually with rice. So actually what happened is the Chhattisgarh's rice story actually started with Raman Singh, who was the previous chief minister, And it was during the BJP government of Raman Singh that for the first time, the government started buying paddy directly from the farmers, It was not there, because earlier, whatever procurement was happening from farmers was taking place mostly in Punjab and Haryana, and to some extent in Tamil Nadu and in Andhra. But in a poor state like Chhattisgarh, where the government started buying rice from farmers, that was a huge success. And on top of the MSP which the center announces, Raman Singh started giving a bonus, on paddy, something like 200 rupees per quintal, which I think he raised it eventually to 300 rupees. So now what has happened is Bhupesh Baghel has actually built on that scheme, and in fact, the procurement has increased even further. They've increased it so much that today I think Chhattisgarh is, the number 3 as far as rice procurement goes, I think number 1 is Punjab and number 2 is Telangana. And they are paying the highest ever price, like if you are getting, say, 2,050 per quintal, which is the center's MSP, Bhupesh Baghel government is giving another 600 rupees as bonus, So which means if a farmer normally is getting, say, 2,000 rupees, here you're getting 2,600 rupees. And now he's saying that, if you vote us back to power, we'll give you 3,600 rupees. And Chhattisgarh in this state, as I said, 60% of people are engaged in agriculture. And I've estimated that the total payment to farmers, through purchases of paddy is something like 28,500 crore, which is huge, And obviously, all that money is flowing only into the rural area. So definitely, I think it's a huge vote catcher, And to that extent, yes, I think Chhattisgarh is very important. Agriculture is very important to Chhattisgarh.
And now from Chhattisgarh, we move to Rajasthan, where farmers grow a whole range of crops, from bajra, jowar, and moong, to wheat, mustard, chana, garlic, and onion. But besides this, the state also grows cotton, which at the moment is under attack by the pink bollworm. Talk about how big of an issue that is.
Yeah, so Rajasthan and Chhattisgarh are in a way polar opposites. Chhattisgarh is all rice, whereas Rajasthan hardly grows any rice. Whereas, as you said, they grow, an enormous variety of crops. So in northern Rajasthan, which is basically your Ganganagar and Hanumangarh districts, they mostly grow cotton. And this year they have grown something like 8 lakh hectares of area they have sown under cotton, which is a record. And from the reports which we are getting is that crop has been totally devastated. I think people are talking of anywhere from 30 to 60% crop loss, which has been caused because of this pink bollworm. And 8 lakh hectares means, say if you take an average farmer who has, say, 1 hectare, that means about 8 lakh farmers, right? Something like 8 lakh families, So to that extent, cotton is very important to northern Rajasthan. But if you look at the rest of Rajasthan, you have bajra, you have mustard, you have wheat, you have chana. So I would say that Rajasthan is a very interesting state. Both Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh are highly diversified states. They are not like Punjab and Haryana, which are just, rice and wheat, or of course, Chhattisgarh is just rice, So to that extent, these are far more agriculturally more complex states, because each part of that state is growing some different crop,
Right. So why don't we talk about Madhya Pradesh next? Over 44% of the state's economic productivity comes from agriculture. And you write that over the years, the state has invested a lot in this sector. It has improved irrigation systems, laid down canals, and installed power connections for irrigation pumps. And a lot of this has happened under the Shivraj Singh Chauhan-led BJP government. Is that going to help Chauhan come back to power in the state?
See, Shivraj Singh Chauhan has done to Madhya Pradesh's agriculture what probably Pratap Singh Kairot did to Punjab's agriculture. The amount of, the way he invested in irrigation, expanding irrigation and also creating a lot of mandis. A lot of mandis were built in the last 20 years, mostly under Shivraj Singh Chauhan's time. And also, the lot of procurement of wheat. Madhya Pradesh today is actually, I think, the second largest contributor of wheat to the central pool. Just like Chhattisgarh is number 3 in paddy. So Chhattisgarh and Madhya Pradesh, so both have happened actually under BJP governments. BJP governments of Raman Singh in Chhattisgarh and Shivraj Singh Chauhan in Madhya Pradesh. But I think this time what has happened is, I think most of the agricultural achievements of Shivraj Singh Chauhan was in his previous terms. In the present term, you can see there is some kind of fatigue, probably not many new initiatives, compared to his earlier terms. I think probably not much. So there's been some kind of a fatigue, which happens in the normal case, like what has happened to even Punjab, etc. Right? There's been a lot of agricultural fatigue. So now that is also happening. So I don't know to what extent this will affect the electoral outcomes. But all we know is that agriculture is very important to Madhya Pradesh.
And Harish, in the end, let's talk about Telangana, which currently has the Bharat Rashtriya Samiti in power, led by K. Chandrasekhar Rao, KCR. You write that this time the government's trump card is the Raitu Bandhu scheme. So talk about what this scheme is and in what way do we see it helping the government there electorally?
See, Raitu Bandhu is India's first direct benefit transfer scheme, for farmers, where farmers are paid basically 5,000 rupees per acre per season, So suppose I grow 2 crops, that is one during the Kharif and one during Rabi. I get 10,000 rupees for 1 acre. So if I own, say, 5 acres, if I'm a farmer having 2 hectares, that is 5 acres, then I'm getting basically 50,000 rupees per year. That is the payment and the government is giving it to me, right? Telangana government. And the BRS government, at that time it was called TRS, the Telangana Rashtriya Samiti. So when they announced it in May 2018, the Modi government came out with its PM Kisan program, I think in November 2018. So basically they saw that, the idea of giving farmers cash instead of tying it with subsidy, instead of providing, subsidized inputs, cheap fertilizer, free power, etc. Here he's saying that I will increase it from 10,000 rupees per year to 12,000 rupees. So definitely I think it has been a huge vote catcher. And alongside, I think just like what Shivraj Singh Chauhan did in Madhya Pradesh, there's been a huge expansion in irrigation in Telangana, last 7-8 years. You had, I think, probably the world's biggest lift irrigation project at Kaleshwaram. So their irrigated area, etc., has risen massively. So which is why now you see that Telangana today is the second largest contributor of paddy after Punjab. So when you look at these states, you see Telangana is number 2 in paddy and Chhattisgarh is in number 3. And Telangana, incidentally, is also a huge cotton producer. It is now number 3 in cotton, after Gujarat and Maharashtra. And it is also number 1 in procurement. So again, I think there's been a lot of, farmer-focused policies which KCR government has followed, So I think this time the elections are going to be very interesting. And my feeling is that these farmers' issues will come to the fore in some way or the other.
And next we talk about hostage situations in conflict zones. Earlier this month, the militant group Hamas launched an unprecedented attack on Israel. In retaliation, Israel conducted an airstrike on Gaza, triggering a war between the two sides that has now resulted in the deaths of at least 4,000 people and injuring over 10,000. And at the beginning of all this, according to Israeli military, the Hamas militants had infiltrated southern Israel, taking around 199 people hostage into Gaza. These hostages were mostly civilians, including women, children, and the elderly. Now, it is not uncommon for various militant and terrorist groups to hold people hostage during unconventional warfare. But the fate of these hostages depends on how different countries negotiate with the kidnappers. To know more about these situations and the potential fate of the Israeli hostages in Gaza, my colleague Utsa Sarmin speaks to Indian Express's Deeptiman Tiwary.
So Deeptiman, you have written that taking hostages has been a strategy used in unconventional warfares. Can you first explain to us what unconventional warfares are?
So, unconventional or asymmetric warfare is basically in reference to a war that you may be fighting not with another country, or as we understand as a conventional war where, say India and Pakistan are going to war, or India and China are fighting. So that is a conventional war where two countries are fighting. You are aware of what steps that another country can take. There are some codes, there are some rules which are followed, there are international norms which are followed. So, in an unconventional war, you are probably fighting with an organized group which has a certain political objective or an ideological objective. So, for example, if you're fighting the Islamic State or you're fighting Al-Qaeda, and in this case where Israel is fighting the Hamas, they have an ideological objective. And this ideological objective and their way of fighting may not fit into the traditional understanding of war as countries fight with each other. So, for example, when India and Pakistan fight, they are aware that each one is a nuclear power. So escalation beyond a point can actually destroy both the countries. Now, when you fight Islamic State is actually aiming for complete destruction of its own self. So the rules of the game completely change, because Islamic State is saying that the ultimate aim of our entire work is actually to die and to bring apocalypse. So the rules of the game change.
Right, and how common are hostage situations in this kind of warfares? And can you also talk about the motivation behind kidnapping people?
So, hostage taking is a very common practice in warfare. In fact, according to a data by the International Terrorism Attributes of Terrorist Events, which is known as the Iterate Project, between 1968 to 2018, there were close to 4,000 transnational hostage and kidnapping incidents by terrorist groups across the world. So, it's very, very common. And largely it is done as a bargaining chip. So you take hostages and you try to negotiate for some kind of, political or policy concession. For example, release of prisoners or, removal of some law or, lifting of some ban or something else. I mean, different groups have different motivations. In recent times, at least since the 90s, we have seen a large number of hostage taking, which is done for ransom. Now, this is not ideological. In this case, you're not sort of kidnapping 5 Americans because you hate America. You're kidnapping 5 Americans because you know that America has a lot of money and it can pay. Probably. There have been instances of very weird motivations as well, very weird demands. Like, for example, in Sierra Leone, after hostage taking, the captors actually demanded education in a foreign university, which is quite weird and unheard of. So, all kinds of motivations actually lead to hostage taking, historically, as we've seen.
Right, and can you tell us how frequently these groups actually achieve their objectives?
Again, if we look at some research that has been done by experts, hostage-taking attacks constitute around 16.9% of all transnational terrorist attacks, between 1978 and 2018. This is a paper that was published in Journal of Conflict Resolution in 2020. And gradually, over the years, if we see that this phenomena has increased, it now stands at 22.3% between 2002 and 2018. So the practice of hostage taking is catching up. So naturally, it must be lucrative and successful for more and more terror groups to be taking to this tactic. Now, according to another paper on this, the success rate of hostage taking, where a terror group has been able to get some of their demands fulfilled by the nation or the country whose citizens it is kept captive, that success rate has been around 27%. So in 27% cases, they've got part of their demands fulfilled. The data also shows that 50% of all victims in hostage situations have been ordinary civilians, followed by corporation officials at 21% and diplomats and government officials 21%. So if we see in the ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict, where around 150 people have been taken hostage, again, majority of them are civilians. So terror groups repeatedly use this tactic to target civilians because they're soft targets. It's easier to kidnap a civilian than, say, a high government official.
And now coming to negotiations, could you talk about the kind of techniques different nations have employed in hostage situations?
Look, different nations react to hostage situations differently depending upon their policy as well as the situation that they may be facing at that time. So, for example, the US and UK as a policy have this rule that they will not negotiate with terrorists at all. So, no negotiations with terrorists. So, if their citizens or officials, get kidnapped or are taken hostage by a terror group, there is either an unsaid, unrevealed backroom negotiation, which takes place, and later the US claims that they were released without any condition. Okay, maybe some ransom is paid backdoor and it is not revealed. Or they conduct military operations to get them released, or they just let them die. But a lot of European nations have paid ransom and have been ready to pay ransom. There has also been a debate within, the conflict resolution community that it's not worth it to take an ideological stand of not paying ransom or not negotiating with terrorists, because there is actually no evidence that by not negotiating, hostage taking goes down. So they say that it is far more important to save the lives of your citizens.
Right, and Israel has faced hostage situations before. How has it reacted to them in the past?
So, in the 1972 Munich crisis, Israel refused to negotiate with the Palestinian terrorists, resulting in a German security forces operation that ended in all the hostages being killed. But in the same year, Israel negotiated in Thailand when some of its diplomats and citizens were taken hostage by the same group of Palestinian terrorists, and it gave a safe passage to the Palestinian terrorists into Egypt. Again in 2011, when one of Israel's soldiers, Private Shalit, had been kidnapped by Palestinian terrorists and taken to the Palestine territory and had to stay there for 5 years. Benjamin Netanyahu, who is currently leading the Israel charge against Hamas, he was at the helm of affairs then as well, and he released close to 1,100 Palestinian prisoners at that time. So we see that in different situations, the same country has reacted differently.
Right, and Deeptiman, at this moment there are around 199 Israeli hostages in Gaza. But considering the scale of this war, what options does Israel have right now?
Well, Israel currently does not really have many good options to take into its stride, because there are 2-3 options when a hostage taking takes place. You either negotiate, accede to the demands of the terror group. which is not going to happen because, this has been an unprovoked attack. So many people have got killed. Israel is already calling it the greatest loss after the Holocaust. So, it can't get worse than that. So Israel probably, at least overtly, cannot be seen to be negotiating with the Hamas at the moment. Emotions are running very high. Two is obviously decapitation of the Hamas leadership. That is also a very tough option because, getting inside the Hamas territory, where there are these network of tunnels where the leaders could be hiding, can be a very tough task. And as far as we understand, Israel has never had pinpoint intelligence on where these tunnel networks actually are. Then you have your own hostages, not one or two, where, who are enclosed in a small space where you can, just storm the place and, get them released. You have 150 odd hostages spread across Hamas territory and you don't know where they are kept. So when you start bombarding, indiscriminately, if at all, then you will end up killing your own citizens. If you go for hot pursuit, you are likely to get bogged down in a labyrinthine urban space because Gaza is a packed stretch of land with very high population density. So you're talking of door-to-door fight and you don't know, what is going to come from which direction. So this is a very challenging sort of thing that Israel is facing at the moment, and it does not have many good options.
And considering this situation, can you tell us what kind of action Israel will likely take now to free the hostages?
So it is probably likely to go for a hot pursuit inside, which it has been threatening already, inside Gaza Strip to release its hostages. It is likely that many of these hostages will get killed. It is likely that some Israeli soldiers will also get killed, and a lot of Palestinian civilians might lose their lives in that kind of a situation. But maybe given how high the emotions are running in the nation, we could be facing a situation that Israel is ready to take that risk at this time. One political solution that may be achieved in all of this is the US engaging Qatar or Iran to actually talk to Hamas and end violence first, because until the violence is stopped and hostages are sort of assured of their safety, and negotiations cannot start. So Qatar and Iran both have massive influence on the Hamas. So that could be another route.
And in the end, we talk about Goan cashews. Last week, the Goan nuts got the Geographical Indication tag, or the GI tag, which is a status given to a product belonging exclusively to a particular area.
If you simplify, it's basically a trademark.
That's Indian Express's Pavneet Singh Chaddha, who reports on Goa for the paper.
A trademark of any good, when it is sold in a market, it comes with a specific logo and it specifies that this good basically originates from a particular geographical region, and it is supposed to have some unique identifiers, some characteristics and some qualities.
In fact, he tells us that in the past, the GI tag has also been given to other Goan heritage products, like the Indo-Portuguese sweet bebinka and the rather potent spirit cashew fenny. But when it comes to cashews themselves, he says they are central to Goa's economy. And much like bebinka and fenny, they also have a rich and a complex history. In this segment, Pavneet joins my colleague Rahel Philipose to tell us more about Goan cashews and why this GI tag matters.
So Pavneet, can you start by telling us how the cashew first came to India and how it grew to become such a significant contributor to the state's economy?
Cashew was brought to Goa when it was under Portuguese rule by the Portuguese in 16th century. And according to the historical records, which I reviewed when I was doing this story, was that it states that cashew was brought from northeast Brazil to Goa. And at the time, it was not used as a crop which could be used for, as an edible nut. It was at the time of its introduction, cashew was mainly used as a crop for soil conservation to protect soil erosion along the coastline. And only, say, about in the mid-18th century, the importance of the crop, the edible value of the nut which is there in the cashew was discovered. And according to, this is a story that, farmers and it's also documented in government records. The story is that it was discovered by Goan prisoners who were exiled to Mozambique, which was also under Portuguese rule at the time. So over time, basically, once its edible value was discovered, there were a lot of processing units that started coming up. And only in the last 100 years, like somewhere in 1920s, the first processing units started coming up in Goa. The first cashew factory in Goa started operations in 1926, and in a few years you had the first consignment of cashews nuts that was being exported mainly to America. So over time what has happened is now in the last 100 years, cashew has grown from a small cottage type of industry 100 years ago to a large scale one in Goa, and Goan cashews have sort of become synonymous with the identity of Goa, and every tourist who comes to Goa makes it a point to take, a packet of Goan cashews with them. So it has become a huge part of exports and also a major contributor to foreign trade and the economy of Goa.
Right. And what would this GI tag mean for the cashew industry there?
So what has been happening lately in Goa is that a lot of cashews which are processed and manufactured in other states are being sold in Goa. Illegally, they are being marketed as Goan cashews. So what this GI tag essentially does is that it identifies what is a Goan cashew. It has a certain logo to go with it. It has certain compliance norms that the manufacturers need to have on a packet when you buy. So it acts as a differentiator for the cashew market.
Okay, and you had mentioned how non-Goan cashews from other states are being sold in the state. How would you say that affects the cashew traders in the state?
Right. So one part is this, that Goa has a demand of about 20,000 to 25,000 tons of cashews that it requires, to meet its demands. Now, what has happened is the processing in Goa over time in the last, say, 15 years has gone down. So cashew goes through from the crop, from harvesting to the final product reaching the market. It goes through a certain processing cycle till the finished good is made. Now, the manufacturers and processors in the last 15 years, Goan cashew market is largely unorganized. There is one big player which controls about 30% of the market, but if you ignore that, there are a lot of small to medium term sort of factories which are in the trade. So what has happened in the last, say, a decade or more is that a lot of other states, which have invested in processing, say Maharashtra, Gujarat, states that are neighboring Goa, even Kerala, Andhra Pradesh, a lot of these states have started processing cashew. And like I said, because the demand is so much that a lot of that cashew is imported in Goa and sold, but there is no problem in selling products from another state in Goa. The issue comes in where they are being marketed as Goan cashews. So what has been happening is that the Goan cashew traders have been suffering losses because their cost of operation is very high. Goa being a small state, it is subject to a lot of compliance reports. Goa has almost double the minimum wages for labor as compared to its neighboring states. And so because of this, all these cheaper imported cashews, they are sold at a lower price as compared to Goan cashews. So price is not competitive for a Goan manufacturer, and that is where also this, the demand has been coming in, because traders have been complaining that cashews from other states are being sold as Goan cashews.
Right. And you spoke to several traders and trade unions. What did they have to say about the GI tag?
So their hope is that this GI tag will sort of act as a differentiator, and it will give more value to the producers, protect their interests, and they will be able to compete on the price fronts. At least that is the sincere hope. One caveat here I would like to add is that the Department of Science and Technology, which has supported this GI demand tag, they need to have better compliance measures for this GI tag to be successful. So a lot of processors and manufacturers in Goa are saying that unless there are, punitive measures that are taken against these people who are marketing local cashews as Goan cashews, nothing much would change on ground if the department is not acting. So that is the hope that of the traders, that this protection comes in and there is better compliance.
You were listening to Three Things by The Indian Express. Today's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar and produced by Utsa, Sarmin, Rahel, Philipose and me, Shashank, Bhargava. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.